Speaker Nancy Pelosi pronounced the Baucus plan and co-ops dead in the House.
I fully support a public option. A public option will be in the bill that passes the House of Representatives.
When asked about the, quote, violent tone of the national debate, the San Francisco liberal choked up and compared health care reform opposition to anti-gay protests and violence that gripped her city, including the murder of 2 Democratic politicians 30 years ago.
I have concerns about some of the language that is being used because I saw this myself in the late 70s in San Francisco. This kind of rhetoric was very frightening, and it created a climate in which violence took place.
But some health care reform opposition comes from the House Democrats' fiscally conservative Blue Dog coalition of about 50 Democrats who oppose the government-run so-called public option, along with every Republican in the House and Senate.
We begin, though, with a new war of words in the health care debate, another firefight that has nothing to do with health care reform itself. It started with a question for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. At her weekly news conference, she was asked whether she was worried about how harsh the political atmosphere had become. Here's what she said.
I have concerns about some of the language that is being used because I saw this myself in the late 70s in San Francisco. This kind of rhetoric was very frightening, and it created a climate in which violence took place.
Speaker Pelosi appearing to tear up, talking, of course, about the murders of Harvey Milk, a gay civil rights activist and member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, as well as the city's mayor, George Moscone. Her answer triggered an almost immediate backlash. Here's House Republican John Boehner.
Now, listen, this whole issue of race people have tried to raise here over the last week or so. And this insinuation that the people who are opposing the president's policies are motivated by race, capped off by former President Carter's remarks over the last couple of days. Let me tell you what, I reject this resoundingly.
The rhetoric increasingly heated. Candy Crowley tonight has the raw politics.
Good morning.
The Speaker of the House says some of the things she's hearing in the health care debate border on dangerous.
I saw this myself in the late 70s in San Francisco. This kind of rhetoric was very frightening, and it created a climate in which violence took place.
To review, the pro-reform side, including the president, has been called socialist, Marxist, and un-American. Those against the president's plans have been called wingnuts, fringe groups, and racists.
Bottom line is, somebody that we know well, not personally, but publicly, a public figure, is very upset about the potential road that this whole health care debate could be going on.
Yeah, you're talking about the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. She gave her weekly press avail yesterday, but it made national news, international news, because she got all choked up over something that could be very, very serious. She was hearkening back to the 70s, and she was asked about whether or not health care reform and the opposition could bring about violence in this country. Watch this.
I think we all have to take responsibility for our actions and our words. We are a free country, and this balance between freedom and safety is one that we have to carefully balance. I have concerns about some of the language that is being used because I saw this myself in the late 70s in San Francisco. This kind of rhetoric was very frightening. I wish that we would all, again, curb our enthusiasm.
It's a good show on HBO, Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I think that she has to say, I take responsibility for some of it, too. Remember the president, the worst president we ever had, the way she has been polarizing as a speaker, hardly a uniter. And she was so out of touch, this what drives a lot of people crazy, not for violence, but when you bring up something as controversial and as in the fray as Acorn, and she doesn't even know what they're talking about, yet she's got so much power, that frustrates people.
To put it into context, she's talking about the assassinations of San Francisco Mayor George Moscone and Supervisor Harvey Milk. That happened, of course, back in the 70s. This is dangerous territory to go down this path of equating what's going on now with health care reform in opposition to it to what happened to those two gentlemen in San Francisco politics 30 years ago. To me, strategically or not, to get emotional like that and try and compare the two is very dangerous territory.
What?